But let's start with Northern Ireland. This situation over there, it really is escalating. Last night, it spread 20 miles from the riots in Ballymena to a leisure centre where families who were trying to escape the violence, so they travelled 20 miles to get away from it, were sheltering. Rioters turned up and put it to the torch. What's happening over there?
It feels like people are very agitated by a court case that is going on. Police have said this is racist thuggery. There is clearly an issue, and people getting in touch with us this morning say this is an issue that is not being acknowledged. It's talked about in very harsh terms. Obviously, let me read you a comment. Albert, the violence is 1,000,000% wrong in Ballymena, but surely the government must see the issue with integration and asylum seekers isn't working. How do we handle this, Aisha?
I think we have to separate the two things. Of course, we have to have a conversation about immigration, and the Prime Minister made a quite a controversial speech a few weeks ago talking about some of the tensions. But there is no world in which this kind of behaviour is OK. Just think about what it must be like for those families. They have had to leave their homes because of racist abuse. They are put in a leisure centre, and then that leisure centre is set on fire. We have heard about thugs marauding through the streets, knocking on people's doors, going, "Where are the foreigners?" People are having to put stickers on their door. I'm sorry, this is absolutely terrifying. I mean, to me, it sounds like something from the 1930s Germany, you know, people going through It is terrifying. And look, two things can be true at the same time. Yes, there are clearly issues in these communities, and I'm not shying away from that. But anybody who thinks it is OK to terrorise families who have done nothing wrong, they're hard-working people, yes, many of them are immigrants, that is not a crime.
But is this what potentially happens when incendiary, literally, issues like these are sort of brushed under the carpet? I agree with you 1,000%, of course. What we're seeing there is utterly unacceptable, and the pain that the families are going through is unimaginable. But many would say that this is the kind of thing which can erupt when free and open discussion, public discussion, is suppressed.
So I tend to share that view, because clearly the violence is totally unacceptable. But then you've got to say, you know, as Tony Blair used to say, you've got to look at the causes of crime. You've got to look at why people are doing this. And if people feel that there's no other way to express their concern, a handful of very malevolent people will exploit that.
They'll ride on the back of it.
And exactly. Yeah. And that seems to be the issue here. And I think they've got to... I suspect what happened was that a policy had shifted, and then it was quite a sudden transition for whatever community. That's what it appears to look like. And I think that you know, people should have had more consultation. They should have rolled the pitch before saying that all these people should be there.
But the difficulty with all of this is, right, yes, there are tensions. There's no getting away with that. But it is never OK to legitimise violence.
I don't think anyone
and fear against. No, but what you do see a narrative kind of coming out, and we saw this after the Southport riots as well, when, you know, hostels were asylum seekers, people were trying to set those on fire. Yeah. There was almost a kind of a narrative saying, it's sort of OK to do this because this is an explosion of frustration.
But aren't people saying you need to deal with these issues before they become an explosion?
That's right.
Susanna, there are going to be a small group of people who will always use any excuse to do this kind of behaviour. And I just think we have to be incredibly incredibly mindful, just to not, like, in any way...
But no one's legitimising it. No one's saying that, you know, these people are justified by, you know, in torching leisure centres. I mean, that's totally unacceptable. But you have to understand, the whole thing is a picture.
It was clearly
you have to understand
that was waiting to go on.
Yes.
The flashpoint seems to have been a court case.
The court case with the two Romanian boys.
Well, we don't know if they were. We don't know for sure if they were Romanian. We do know that they used Romanian interpreters, and a lot of people have drawn conclusions from that, who were up on a sexual assault charge, basically. And it was that hearing, and it was that moment a few days ago that appears to have been the spark that ignited what's burning now.
But a lot of this social unrest comes from flashpoints. I mean, the appalling incident last year in Southport when those 3 girls were killed, that was a flashpoint. You know, the court case that you've described, that was a flashpoint. Yeah. So they're clearly underlying reasons. why this should happen. And I think it's entirely right to look at what those reasons are,
I saw one tweet on this yesterday with someone who lives in Ballymena condemning the violence and saying, but this is what happens, and I'm quoting the tweet, OK, sure. This isn't me speaking, okay. This is what happens when integration is rammed down your throats. So there's that sense that the proper process of integration, which is crucial, you know, this country thrives on immigration and all the rest of it. If it's mishandled, if it's taken for granted...
Well, that was what does that mean? But what does that mean? Because show me the evidence of what these immigrants have done. OK, there's a court case, and that can be a flashpoint. Yeah. But for example, the people that have been interviewed, the family from Bulgaria that was interviewed, they've lived there for 17 years. They've been in the community. They've paid their taxes. Where's the failure of integration there?
But
I think it's very easy to say this stuff. And I'm not saying that, you know, there isn't a problem, but it's you know, when you press people for what's the evidence of this, because I can't see any examples of, certainly the people that have been interviewed, they haven't done anything wrong. They're just families that have moved to this country for 17, 18 years. They've worked really hard. They're bringing up their kids, they're paying their taxes.
Nevertheless, we have this problem, so what are we going to do? Other than rubber bullets and tear gas,
let's call it for what it is. The people in those hotels haven't been here for 17 years. I mean, that's clearly an issue, a kind of administrative issue that's happened. And it happened in England. I mean, I remember before the last election, there were hotels, even in my constituency, there were a couple of hotels that all of a sudden, you know, housed asylum seekers. And people who lived there, or in the vicinity of the hotels, had an issue with that. Yeah. And we had to talk it through. And it seems to me, I don't know the details, I don't know what the history of it is, but it seems to me that these hotels have been commandeered relatively recently. And people are...
Well, that brings us on to another point, doesn't it?
I'm sorry, I was just going to say, sorry, Aisha, on your point about there are always going to be people who will use any excuse. Rioters have been filming themselves on TikTok, burning... I mean, in one case, burning down a house. On Tuesday night, a group of men live-streamed a house that had been set alight before asking their followers for likes and cash gifts in exchange for doing more damage to the property. That's sick.
That is absolutely sick. And that is not somebody who is making a cri de coeur about let's have a conversation about social cohesion.
No, I agree.
These are racist, nasty thugs who are getting their kicks from going around and terrorising, trying to pick out immigrant families and terrorists. These are people who are not in hotels. These are people who are good people that are just trying to live their lives.
As you say, two things can exist.
Two things can exist at the same time.
You get very bad people exploiting these situations, and those are very bad.
Very bad.
Well, this brings us on to another issue directly related, really. The government are saying that they want to bring down dramatically the number of asylum seekers staying in hotels in this country. Well, OK, where are they going to go?
That's the fair question. So, in terms of the numbers, I think they said they're going to save $1 billion by 2029. But that assumes that you're not going to spend a penny on the alternative. And if the alternative costs just as much as housing asylum seekers in hotels, then you're not making any savings. Yeah. So that's a perfectly fair, perfectly fair question.
Is more money, Aisha, going to go into processing asylum claims and perhaps encouraging the French, which the Sun points out this morning, French officials just shrug when people get into boats because I think under current rules they're not allowed to go into the water to stop migrants leaving the shore. Is more money going to go into... Because, again, you know, in order to tackle the result, which is many, many people living in asylum hotels, you need to tackle the number of asylum seekers, don't you, and people making the crossings.
You do, but the first thing you have to do, and Darren Jones, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, did some interviews on this last night, I mean, the first thing you have to do is you've got to get these huge backlogs. You've got to get through these backlogs.
And has more money gone into doing
the government has, since they come in, put in more resources and money and resources into trying to clear this backlog. And what Darren Jones said last night was that the plan is it will actually be cheaper to move people from asylum hotels and put them in different sort of facilities. So that's where they...
But it still costs something.
But look, of course, it's not cost-free,
right? But when we talk about different facilities, are any of us clear about what those facilities are going to be? Or is it going to be sort of spreading those people who are currently in large numbers in asylum hotels into private rented accommodation?
But just as an illustration, the hotel situation costs something like £150 a night. I mean, it's very, very expensive. Whereas, you know, social care, or the sort of provision that is given in social care, can cost as little as £30 a night. So that shows you, gives you a sense.
But if we put them into private rented accommodation on one of these long-term contracts, these 5-year contracts that the government pays, you're then removing that pool of rental accommodation available to people who were born and bred here, basically.
Well, that's why
you've got tension building up.
Sure, but that's why, you know, they've announced £39 billion over 10 years for affordable and social housing. I mean, there's a housing crisis because we're just not building enough homes. And that feeds into that. Yeah. But I think illustrating the fact that, you know, hotel accommodation is about the most expensive accommodation that there is. I mean, we all know that from our own lives. And so putting, you know, millions or, you know, thousands, rather, of asylum seekers in hotels, you can see that's the cost.
There just seems to be an overwhelming sense of impotence over the whole subject. You look at, for example, the number of people who've come across in small boats from France. We're not even halfway through the year there.
Sure.
Yeah, we've got a few days left. 14,812 have now arrived.
So on this, I mean, I've got very strong views on this. I think, because we started, I think, paying the French maybe 10 years ago, and we paid something like, I think, about 800 million over that time, something in that order.
And the figures are going up.
Oh, are they? Yeah. And I think they haven't fulfilled their side of the bargain. I don't know what they're doing to justify all the money that we've given them.
Aisha, one of the beneficiaries of all of this discussion is, of course, Reform UK, because they make this central to their political campaign, and as a result, maybe, of that, possibly other policies as well, surging in the polls.
Although, can I just make just one observation? It was a big spending review yesterday. We are now immediately talking about reform. If I could, I'd like to just spend a minute talking about some of the broader things of the spending review.
We have 10 more minutes in which
I just want to say that we will come to reform because the politics is really, really important.
Well, I thought we could just deal with it now.
No, but I do think it is important that we're talking about spending review, and all we have talked about is asylum hotels. And
we are coming on to the review.
Yeah, but I do think I do think it is important. Yes, of course, Nigel Farage is riding high at the moment. There's no. But what the government of the day has to do is to come forward with a sort of a policy programme that they think, in their judgment, will deliver for the country. And that's what I think they are trying to do.
I was just going to say, the trouble is that people think that Labour is reacting to the threat of reform. And when Keir Starmer made that speech about immigration and called us an island of strangers, many people thought, well, that sounds like it could have been directly delivered by reform. Many people criticised his tone and words in that speech. And then you had the reversal of the winter fuel allowance, which many people believed came because Labour did so badly in the local elections and the by-elections. So there is this sense that actually it's not journalists or media commentators who are emphasising the threat of reform. It was a speech that Keir Starmer did the other day when he consistently talked about Nigel Farage. And Rachel Reeves talked about Nigel Farage in her speech. Right.
Yeah. So, again, two things can be true at the same time. You have to operate as a politician looking at the world of politics, but you also have to put forward your actual prescription for government.
Yes.
And that's what Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves did. Hang on, just let me finish one point and just let me say one thing, please. Let me say, please, which doesn't involve Nigel Farage or asylum seekers. Let me just, please, guys,
stop saying his name, Aisha.
I'm just trying to... You know, on the one hand, people are saying, oh, they're, you know, chasing reform and they're only... And look, you know, you have to be sort of fleet-footed and you have to, you know, respond to events of the day. But I actually think what was set out yesterday is an interesting story. I think one of the justifiable critiques of this government has been, what is the story? They have been in for a year. What is their mission? And I think we saw a story emerge yesterday.
And what do you think that is?
Well, I think it's a proper Fixing Britain story. And one of the things we talked about for many years coming onto the show is the frustration that a lot of people have with short-term politics. You know, we have these short-term 4-year, 5-year electoral cycles. You know, we ask the questions, why is nobody building any power stations? Why is it we can't get any infrastructure
built? This was a long-term review.
And I do think that this is an interesting moment. If you are interested in politics, if you're interested in political history, I think this is a bit of a 1945 moment in the sense of building things that your children and your grandchildren will probably thank this government for.
Two things are true. One, the government has to set its own narrative. very drastically.
Yes.
And two, they're clearly obsessed with Nigel Farage. I mean, for the Prime Minister to mention Nigel Farage in a speech 16 times when Nigel Farage has 5 MPs is completely extraordinary. And I think that you're quite right. It's obvious to me, to the public, that they are very scared of reform and they're trying to claw back some of the political ground that they've lost in the first year to reform.
The other question, the big question this morning that arises out of whatever you agree with or disagree with that was announced by Reeves yesterday is how are they going to pay for it? And the common consensus across the board this morning, any economist you shake your stick at, is she's going to have to put people's taxes up. And that's what people are thinking about this morning out there. How much more am I going to have to pay in tax to fund these long-term plans that I might actually die before they actually come to fruition?
Well, look, I mean, we'll have to wait and see what happens in the budget. The budget is the point at which the tax is. But I do think what is really, really important, and I was actually at an event at Sizewell C just a month ago, meeting with kind of staff. This is the big nuclear power station that has been.
Of course.
And I do think we have, for such a long time, rightly so, bemoaned the fact we've got a lack of confidence in this country about building things, whether it's HS2, whether it's transport, whether it's nuclear.
The question is about
and I do think it is important. I'm being honest, Richard, I'm not in the Treasury.
No.
I can't answer that question, and we are not going to know that question until we get closer to the budget.
I do think
it is important.
Well, we have to discuss it.
But we will, and we will be speculating about tax over the summer. But I just think for the 24 hours after the spending review, it is important that some long-term decisions have been made about transport, about housing, about nuclear, about energy.
As you say, that's the narrative.
Important.
The narrative the government will want. Yeah.
But your question is the immediate question everyone will be asking.
Well, the Treasury
How are we going to pay for
the
this?
Treasury itself suggested local authorities would raise council tax by 5% a year for the rest of this Parliament to fund social care and policing. Translates to a £7.5 billion increase in council tax revenue, and that would add £359 to an average Band D household bill. So that will directly affect
but what's going to happen over the summer, which is what the Treasury would do, and it's right that they should do it, they will leak or they will float a lot of ideas in terms of what the tax regime will be, in terms of increasing taxes. Because you're right, there's a consensus that taxes will go up.
Pay for it. Yeah.
My view is that it'll be impossible for them to put up income taxes on workers.
Politically impossible.
I think it'll be very difficult to do that. Because on the one hand, you're saying, OK, we're not going to take away benefits, we're going to give people more money. But actually saying, oh, we're going to tax working people as well, I think that's politically difficult. So I suspect they're going to go after things like corporation tax. I think a lot of business owners will be quite nervous about what the prescription
That's going to hit growth, isn't it?
That's my view, but that's a contested area.
Huge amounts of money for the NHS. I mean, health is a big winner. But Daisy Cooper of the Lib Dems suggests that that's not enough to fix the system. Let's have a listen. Well, I wanted to ask you, Kate, because this week you've been involved in a remarkable sort of piece of journalism around your own experience, of course, caring for Derek, and that the fact that the unpaid carers in this country bear a huge burden that, if they were paid for by the state, would add up to quite a considerable budget.
Yes, it's a budget that's bigger than the whole of the NHS budget put together. Even, I believe, and I haven't spoken to Carers UK that did a lot of this research this morning with the increase that's been added in. So, you know, that is a huge backbone that's making a lot of people's lives function, and indeed a lot of what we want our society to be function as well. I think, you know, local government associations warning of council tax rises because of this review. Nobody wants a council tax rise, but the other flip side is they're also saying spending cuts, and a lot of these local governments are already on budgets that were set, you know, in 2010-11 that are not functional at the moment. So there will be a lot of people worried about that. One of the big things this week, because it is Carers Week, as you know, that the various charities have been trying to get across is the health impact on carers.
And you personally are an example of that, aren't you?
I know I am. I am an example of that.
Health. And you know, I always make the point, you talk about this not because you're talking just about yourself. You talk about this because you represent thousands, potentially hundreds of thousands of people who don't have a voice to be able to talk about this experience.
It's more than 10 million people, actually.
10
more than
million
10 million
unpaid
people
carers
who have reported that that they have been deeply affected by putting the person they care for first. Right. They don't begrudge it. They don't, you know, in any way not want to do that.
But they pay the
it's
price.
missed appointments, and these can be minor things, which then lead to bigger things, or they could be serious conditions they're already dealing with. And there was an incredible stat that it was like 70%, and this was a GP survey, GP patient survey, you know, nationwide one, saying that 70% of people who are current or former carers have long-term health conditions directly that they attribute to caring.
Then has an impact on the health service.
Which then puts more people in hospital, the health service. It means they then can't perform in their caring roles, so more budget has to be found. So I think there will be disappointment. There wasn't an expectation to see a lot on social care in this budget, and you saying a long-term future, that's the thing that would make people feel the government and previous governments were investing beyond the next parliament if that was sorted.
You were recognised, of course, in the honours list for your work on, you know, sort of advocating
charity and
for
application,
carers. Very, very well deserved.